Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. I'm Hey Shady Lady, and today I'm going to be finishing up the tutorial that I started a couple of days ago where I was doing a make an overlay with me, but we're going to be animating it today. So this is part 2, so definitely check out the little link up here, or there will be a link in the description below for part 1 of this where we design this overlay together in Photoshop and I show my drawing process and how I kind of created the whole design. So what we're making is a 3-piece animated overlay pack, a starting soon screen, a be right back screen, and a stream is over scene. And it's a very simple, minimalist, cottagecore themed kawaii. And we drew all of that together in Photoshop, and I had a bunch of technical difficulties the other day, including a whole audio nightmare where I had to re-upload the video a second time. Don't even get me started. I'm going to try to avoid all of those mistakes this time, so I'm saving to a much larger hard drive in my computer so we won't deal with the disk space issue and yada yada yada. So yeah, thank you all for bearing with me, and I'm sorry for the technical complications. And the link to my blog will be updated in the description below on the first video and will be in the description below here for you to download this free animated pack if you want it. Today's video is kindly sponsored by placeit.net. I've worked with placeit.net a lot in the past. They have been very kind to support my channel for as long as they have, so big thank you to them for sponsoring today's video. And they're an awesome resource for streamers who are just getting started and might not know how to make their own graphic design assets that they need, such as overlays, starting soon screens. They have merch mock-ups, logo design, all kinds of good stuff. They can help you out if you're a new streamer and you're feeling a little lost with all the stuff that you got to get done. So there will be a link below in the description box for 15% off a purchase if you find anything you like. And I suppose that's it. So thank you again to Placeit, and we're going to go ahead and jump into today's video. So to begin with, we're going to come into After Effects. That's where I'm going to be working today. So Adobe After Effects is the animation program that I have been using. It's the one that I've learned how to do. I would love to be able to do tutorials on programs that are free to use. So if you have a suggestion for an app that could work similar to this that you'd like to turn me on to, drop a comment below and I'll look into it and maybe make some future tutorials with that. So when I come into After Effects, the first thing I'm going to need to do is create a new project. And I want to make sure that I have a folder open that has the Photoshop file that I originally designed with all of the editable layers and everything. And I'm just going to take that Photoshop file and drag it into my project panel of Adobe After Effects. And I want to make sure that I keep this as editable layer styles. I don't want to merge this at all. We want to keep all of these layers separate from each other. And just for a disclaimer, I'm still fairly new to After Effects. I've been using it for a couple of years, but I've not taken any kind of fundamental course on it. I will probably not be using the correct terminology for some of the windows or tools, but I'm going to show y'all how I animate and how I've learned to make everything cute. So to get started, you'll want to find the composition, which has like a little picture shape rather than the folder. We don't need the folder. We want the whole composition, and you can either right click and do new comp from selection, or you can just double click it and it's going to open down in your timeline window. And you can see down here, we have all of the different layers that have come in that we've drawn over in Photoshop. The second thing I want to do is I want to double check my composition settings, which you can get to with Control K, or you can come up into the composition drop down and click on the composition settings window. And this is going to pop it up. We just want to double check our width and height is correct, 1920 by 1080. And the main thing I'm over here looking for is duration. You also might want to check your frame rate. I prefer 30 FPS, but that's your own personal preference. So what I'm checking with the duration is how long do I want this animation to be? For a really simple animation, I think 15 seconds is probably perfect. Anywhere from 15 to 30. 10 might be a little too short. Keep in mind this is a starting soon screen, so people are going to be looking at this for a long period of time. So how often do you want that animation looping? I'm going to go with 15 seconds for this one because I don't want this to be too complicated. If you had to change the time limit, you'll want to make sure you drag this bar out all the way so you can see the full timeline. And sometimes these layers, they're not going to be stretched out to the full length. So just make sure that everything is set to the full 15 seconds. I'm actually probably going to save 2 different versions of this. Part of me really likes the simplistic look that this had with only the frog and the starting soon text. Something about this, just this super minimalist look, is really appealing to me for some reason. But I'm also going to export this very busy version too. I say very busy, but the more cluttercore feeling one. I know that I don't need to do anything with my background. My background is going to stay static the whole time. So I'm going to start with animating my frog. And the first thing to do is select the layer that you're going to be animating, and you can see it highlighted them. I'm going to use my mouse wheel to scroll in over here so I can get a little closer. I press H to switch to the hand tool so I can click and drag around and make sure the frog is nice and centered. And then I press V again to switch back to my positioning tool. And these are also available up in this top toolbar up here if you don't remember the keyboard shortcuts. H for the hand tool, V for the selection tool is what I'm using. So what I'm doing here when I look at this frog is I'm going to set most of these items on screen to be rotating back and forth gently. And in order to get them to rotate, they're going to be rotating on the anchor point axis. So this little crosshair looking thing in the middle is the anchor point. You want to think about the center of gravity of the object. If you think about a human, for example, when you're looking at a human being, the center of a human is about at the hip level, right about the belly button to the hip bones, depending on, you know, their genetics and whatever. But if you think about like when you're sitting in a chair and where you go to get up from, you're pulling from like the center of your chest right around the rib cage where your heart is. So your anchor point is not the center of your body geometrically. It's where you're pulling weight from. So we want to think about that with all of our objects too. And so when we're looking at this frog, because of these flowers that I've added to the top of it, the center point that is auto-generated into this is sitting actually close to the top of this frog's head. And I want it to rotate from more the center of like probably like right under its chin level. So to move this anchor point, I'm going to select the pan behind anchor tool up in the top bar, or you could press Y, and that will allow me to click and drag and move this anchor point around. Before I do this, I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. This is rotating with the anchor point in that center right there. When I move the anchor point to the spot I want, which is a little bit more here, this might be too small of a difference for most people to notice, but he's rotating from that spot. I feel like the frog's not going to be a great example of the difference this can make. So I'm actually going to come and show y'all over on this tea kettle. So for the tea kettle, because of the shape of this object, you can see it's got the center point up here in this very weird spot. When we rotate this around, it's rotating it like that, and it's a little awkward looking to me. So we could either move this to the direct center of the kettle, which is right about here, and now it's going to rotate in something that makes a little bit more sense of like the actual center of that object. But what I actually am going to be doing with this kettle later, I want it to look like it's being held by someone and it's rotating like you're swinging it back and forth. So I'm going to move the anchor point up to the top of this handle, and then when we rotate it, see, now it looks like it's swinging back and forth, and I think that's like a little bit cuter, so we're gonna go with that as the anchor point. And hopefully using the kettle will illustrate what I was talking about a little bit better. So back to our froggy, we have our anchor point settled where we want it to be, and every time you go in to do scale, especially scaling stuff too, and rotations and all of this kind of stuff, you want to double check where that anchor point is set. That will make a huge difference in the overall look of the animation. So for our little frog, I'm actually, because the frog is the centerpiece, I want to add a little bit more to this than I do the other items, but I'm going to start by making sure my timeline tool, this little blue marker down here, is set to 0 seconds, and then I'm going to come down into my frog layer. It will start out closed, so you can either drop down the arrow next to the frog, which will open up all of the transformations, or you can press R for rotation to only get the rotation one up. I just want to work with rotation right now, so I'm going to press R. And then when I'm set at 0 seconds, I'm going to go ahead and toggle on our time vary stopwatch. So I'm going to click on that little watch, which means that we're wanting multiple keyframes throughout this timeline, and the rotation of the frog is going to change over time. So I've got it set at 0 rotation right now, and I'm going to do every 3 seconds or so, I'm going to have this rotate a little bit more. So we'll do like a 15% rotation to the right, and then about 6 seconds in, we'll have it back at 0. So back to center point, and then 9 seconds in, we're going to be negative 15 rotated, so it's rotated a little bit counterclockwise, and then 12 seconds we'll be back at 0, and then 15 seconds we'll be at 15% rotation again. If you've got a big brain, you're already seeing an issue here. We want, for this animation to look looped, we want the very first frame and the very last frame to match, because if I played through this timeline right now, when this reaches the end, it pops back into place. So what I'm going to do to fix this, there's a bunch of different ways you could approach fixing this. You could even just move some of these timeline points around, these little keyframes around, until you have enough space at the very end to add one more 0 point, we could do something really simple like that. So I'm just going to copy my first keyframe, which is 0% rotation. I'm going to move to the 15-second mark. I'm going to press Control V to paste that. And we could take a look at how that looks. That's one way that I might go about fixing this. See, he's rotating at 0 here, pushing over to 15. He's going to quickly snap back to 0 there. So I actually think that's going to be really obvious what is happening. So that's not how I'm going to fix this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to delete the first anchor point of 0. I'm going to click and drag to select all of these keyframes, and I'm going to move them over so that we have him, he's not starting at his 0 point, he's starting at his 15% rotation, and by 6 seconds he hits -15, so by 12 seconds he's going to be back to 15. And what I might do is actually just stretch these out. So I'm going to take this 12 marker one and I'm going to go ahead and move this out to 15. And then I know I've got one midpoint here, which 15 divided by 2 is 7.5. So halfway through this animation is 7.5 seconds. So I'll move that midpoint. And then I'm just going to eyeball these other two keyframe parts to be about halfway between those two. Then we're going to take a look. I'm just going to go ahead and start this towards the end so we can see how it looks when he's reaching resting point, and then the animation loops. And I think that looks good. It's looking at this, I might even actually, I think that's probably pretty good. The main thing is that this is really stiff looking and not very interesting looking. So I'm going to add an easy ease. I'm going to ease these rotations into each other. I'm going to select all of the keyframes to do that. So you could either click and drag through the timeline to pick them all, or you could just come over here and click rotation, which will automatically select all of the keyframes in that. And then I'm going to press F9 to add an easy ease. Or you could right click and go into keyframe assistant and do easy ease that way. And what this does, it's a pretty gentle difference, but it just makes it slowly ease from one point to the next. And the thing that's gonna bother me about this is we really don't need to have a keyframe point for 0. By nature of 0 seconds, we're at 15, and by 7.5 seconds, I want you at -15. He's gonna hit the 0 point anyway. He's gonna hit that 0. We really don't need this one. And because it's there with an easy ease on, you can see the frog kind of comes to a stop when it hits this 0 mark. Just a little bit of a gentle stop right there before it eases into this next keyframe point. And I think that looks okay when he's easing to one side and then he starts to ease to rotate back to the other. I think it looks okay there, but when he's easing to a stop in the middle, to me that looks a little strange with this style of animation. There's two ways I could fix this. The first way is I could just delete that middle frame so it's not there at all and he just eases right through that section, or I could right click on that point where I don't want the frog to come to that stop. I could go into keyframe interpolation and I can change the temporal interpolation into auto Bezier, and that is the circle shape of it, and that means there is no stopping point. It just has a constant motion. It keeps on rolling through. For me personally, with this particular animation, I'm just going to delete these middle points. They're not necessary. And now we're going to have a very gentle, every 15 seconds, the frog is going to rotate left and right. There's going to be one full rotation of that. And I think that's going to be nice and gentle enough for this kind of minimal animation we're going for. So another thing that I want to do with this frog to make him stand out a little bit more is I want to scale him up and down. I'm going to select my frog layer and press S to open up the scale options. I'm going to drag my timeline bar back to 0 seconds. I'm going to click our stopwatch and we're at 100% scale here. By 7.5 seconds, when we've reached that leftmost point, I want our frog to be about 125%. I'm gonna have him be a little bit bigger, and then when he reaches back down to 15% clockwise rotation, he'll be back down to a 0. So he's going to move in, scale up, move in, and scale down. Just dragging through here, I don't like the look of this, so I'm gonna try something different. I want him to reach his biggest size when he's at his little resting point here in the middle, which looks like almost 4 seconds. I'm going to drag my 125% keyframe to that point that I found that I like. I'm going to come back over to the 100% one. I might just delete this keyframe for now, and I want to make sure he's at 125% when he's like fully level, when he's got a straight little line on the top of his head. And then we're going to take the 100% one. I might keep it. I'm going to keep it at 0. I'm going to add it at 15 seconds, and I'm going to put it here at that halfway point, 7.5 seconds. And we're just going to take a look at what this looks like. We're going to see how we like it. I don't think I like it. So this is a lot of, let me F9 to easy ease these and just see if that changes my opinion at all. But I don't think that's quite the Well, I don't know, maybe that is kind of what I'm going for. Yeah, maybe I do kind of like it. So what the easy is in here, so it's like he's like, and then he like levels back out. Yeah, okay, that's kind of cute. And it's just like a nice little gentle rotation, a nice gentle easy animation. Another thing I'm going to do for this frog specifically is these little flowers on his head. I want to bend and wiggle and move around. I unfortunately did not draw them all separate from each other. I mean, it looks like they're split right here in the middle, so I could probably get these 2 flowers on the right and the 3 flowers on the left to bend separate from each other, but that's going to be about it. And the way that I do this is with a puppet tool. So I'm going to make sure my frog layer is selected. I'm going to come up to the top bar up here. You could also hit Control P if you like keyboard shortcuts, but I'm going to long click on this puppet pen tool, which looks like a push pin up here, and I'm going to change it to the puppet advanced pen tool. And then what I'm wanting to do is you want to think about like literally like a puppet where they've got like the wiggly legs and what is connected to strings and how you're going to be moving these little parts around. So what I want to do first is I know I don't want any part of the frog to be moving at all. I just want the flowers to move. So I'm going to put a bunch of puppet pins along the frog up here because none of these points should be moving, and I'm not going to have any animations to go on with these. I'm going to add one in the center too. And then to show you how this might affect it, I'm going to put a puppet pin in the center of this flower over here. And now you can see how this moves, but the frog itself doesn't. If I didn't have those puppet pins in, you can see how moving this part of the flower is stretching the rest of the parts of the flower. The frog's face would be moving with it too, but these points are pinned in, they're pinned in place, and they're not going to move. So I'm going to add one puppet pin tool here, and I'm going to add one puppet pin tool to this right flower. So a mistake I made already is when I was setting these puppet pins, I didn't drag my little timeline bar back to 0, so you can see how these keyframes have just been added out into random positions about 10.5 seconds in, because that's just where my timeline bar was set at the moment. So what I have to do now is I have to manually reposition these, and I'm going to figure out which puppet pin tools are the ones I'm actually going to be messing with. Puppet pin 11 over here, you can see when I have this selected, this circle is filled in, so this is puppet pin 11. I'm going to right click and go to rename, and I'm going to call this left flower so I know which one is which. And then when I click on puppet pin 10, it changes to this one being selected. So I'm going to rename that to right flower. This is just for organization. The rest of these I could actually just minimize and not worry about. I don't even need to change these other key point or these keyframe locations. That's not important because I'm not going to animate the rest of the frog at all. I'll go ahead and select all of these keyframes over here. I'm going to drag these back to 0 seconds. Honestly, we probably could have just done the flowers with one puppet point, but I'm going to have these right when the frog starts to spin back around. I'm thinking about physics right now and how, like, if you move this way and then you start to bounce back, the other object is still kind of catching up with the inertia or whatever. I'm not a physics master, but I want this to look natural. So not at the exact point that the frog comes to a stop, but a little bit after it starts to move in the other direction is where I'm going to set my next point. And this is where I want the flowers to kind of have bounced a little bit to the right. So I'm going to make sure I only have one of them selected, my left flower, and I'm going to moosh it over a little bit, and I'm going to use the rotation tool by clicking on the outside of the circle and spinning it around. So we're going to have these spin a little bit and like lean a little bit over here, and I'm going to do the same with this one. Let's just see how it looks like. I'm experimenting right now. I don't know if I'm going to like this. I'm going to copy all of the keyframes from 0 seconds, and I'm going to add it shortly after this and just see what that bounce looks like. Let me put the easy ease on it too. So select all of the keyframes and press F9. I don't know. I don't know about this one, Chief. Okay, another thing that I probably should do is, like, right now, because these keyframes are so far apart, the animation is like very slowly make the flowers bend. So I want this to be like it's like whipping a little bit. So I'm going to copy these initial keyframes that are at the base resting position, hit Control C. I'm going to bring them out to a little bit before this and hit Control V so that they kind of whip right here. So now it's starting to need a little bit more. I think I actually could probably move these down a little bit further. And maybe go ahead and add this easy ease on these too. And now we're just kind of looking at the overall. So that's kind of cute. A little boink, a little boop. not terrible. Over here we want about the same thing, but it's going to happen shortly after it actually reaches the 15 point. So this one's going to be a little difficult because it's actually happening over the loop portion. So I'm just going to copy the resting position of the keyframes. I'm going to paste it right about here. We're going to come over to the start. We know that just about right here is where we want the flowers to start bending the other way. I'm going to start with the right flower on this one because this one's going to swing the most over this far. I'm going to rotate it a little bit and just kind of move it around. Do the same thing with this second flower, rotate it a little bit so the petals don't look so weird. I'm going to copy that resting keyframe position back to normal, right? And we're going to have it kind of right about here. And let's see how that looks. Shloop. Back into place, he's back in the middle, and then it kind of is going to whip a little bit over to the left when he's bouncing over there. It's just, it's not great. Okay, look, it's really not that good. But it's just a little something something. It's a little cute, a little bouncy. Feel like they should go ahead and start leaning before this loop comes in. They're moving a little too quickly over here, I think. How do I want to do this? So right now I have this the 0 position spot, and I have the full right swing spot. So I'm going to come a little bit in between here when they've made a little bit of movement, and I'm going to set a keyframe by clicking on this little button over here. I'm like, I want this positioning. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to delete our resting keyframe position at the start. I'm going to go ahead and move this over here, and I want the end of my animation to reach this point too. That should add the gradual movement. That's a little bit better. What I could do just to add a little bit more life, so it's not only when the frog is at the farthest point of the rotation, is I could add a little bit of movement in here that just kind of makes the flowers kind of rotate a little bit. I'm going to have them rotate away from each other, and then they should go back to base position. So that just is going to give them a little bit of bounce here in the middle, even though nothing's really happening. And I'm going to copy that same positioning and paste it over here at this other midpoint when the frog's head is level. And that's just going to give it a little bit of movement going on while it's not just whipping around. And there we've got a little bit of movement on our little froggy's flowers. And that's probably all I want to do for the frog. And so I'm going to minimize all of these puppet tools over here and lower the effects. And I'm going to minimize the frog overall. And I'm also going to go ahead and animate the text while we're here. So for the text, I'm just going to do a really simple transparency. So I'm going to click and select the text layer. I'm going to press T for transparency, which is opacity in After Effects. I'm going to toggle on the stopwatch, and I'm going to change our starting point to 0% opacity. And by 7.5 seconds, I want this to be 100%. So we're going to have this slowly fade into itself. I'm going to copy our first keyframe point, which is a 0% opacity, move the time marker to 15 seconds, the final frame, make it 0. And then I'm going to click on the opacity section so all of the keyframes are highlighted and selected, and I'll press F9 to ease them into each other. So it's a little gentler of an animation. And then it's just going to be a nice casual fade into screen, and then it's going to fade back out. And that's going to be over 15 seconds. That's going to come up into visibility, go out of visibility. So for most of these, I'm just going to be doing a rotational, just like a wiggle one. For the flowers and the stars, I'm going to do something a little different. I want the flowers and stars to do full spins. I don't want them to just wiggle back and forth. I want them to do one full 360 spin every 15 seconds for the loop. So I don't want two objects next to each other on screen that are doing the same animation behavior. So I'm actually going to change some of the positioning of this stuff really quick. We'll start with this flower up here. We're going to select the layer, and then we're going to press R to bring down the rotation window. We want to double check that our anchor point is in a good position. It's just slightly off center for me. And for these, it will make a difference. And look, I can go ahead and show you. I'm going to move this anchor point to an awkward position of this flower so you can see the difference that an anchor point makes. So we're going to come back in and move that anchor point into the center. So that's much more what we want from the look of something spinning. So what I did to get this is I come to 0 seconds. I press the stopwatch on the rotation tool. It's set to 0%. I'm going to bring our little dragger point all the way to 15 seconds, or the final frame of the animation. And I'm either going to change the degree to 360, which is a full circle, Or I could just do 1 times. I could change this first part to 1 times, 1 spin. And then when we have this going, it's going to be a nice, gentle little spin that's happening. I'm not going to easy ease this one because that's going to cause it to come to a gradual stop when it reaches the next keyframe. And I just want this one to be in constant motion. And I'm going to do the same things for flower 1 and for the star. The only difference for flower 1 is that I want it to spin the opposite direction. For the rotation here, I'm going to change it to -1. I want it to go backwards instead of forward, so it'll do a counterclockwise rotation. You can see now that flower number 2, the white flower, is spinning clockwise, and flower number 1, the orange flower, is spinning counterclockwise. So we have 3 objects that are spinning. We have our little frog that's bouncing around, and we've got some dynamic movement with the flowers on his head. The next one that I think is going to be a little complicated to animate is the candle, because I want the candle flame to kind of move around a little bit. So that one's also going to require a puppet tool. To make the candle flame wiggle, we need to do similar to how we just did with that frog. I'm going to click on my advanced puppet pin tool up here, and I'm going to add a bunch of anchor points, puppet pin tools that are behaving like anchors. They're holding this candle in place and not letting it move at all. And then I'm going to add 1 puppet pin tool to the top of this candle flame. So that moves around, but the candle itself stays in place. We're at 0 seconds. We have our initial starting point, and then we want this to just wiggle back and forth like a candle flame. And this one, because it's a candle flame, this one doesn't have to follow the same behavior throughout the whole thing. So I'm going to kind of have this wiggle all over the place. The only thing that you're going to need to keep in mind for this type of animation is to make sure that the 0 second frame and the final second frame match each other. So I'm going to go ahead and copy those to each other. And then I'm just going to play around a little bit and move this all over the place and give it some kind of weird behaviors. I'm going to go ahead, I preemptively easy ease these by selecting all 3 of the position, scale, and rotation, and then I press F9 to easy ease these. And then we're just going to kind of preview the behavior. So it feels to me just watching it like it's moving a little too slow, but I also think with all of the other stuff going on, that's not going to be too big of a problem, because once I add this wiggle to the candle overall, I don't think that the candle flame is going to be that noticeable anymore. So I'm going to minimize the puppet effect, minimize our effect, click on the candle, and I'm going to press R for rotation, turn on the stopwatch so we start the keyframes up, and I'm going to add just a gentle rotation so that every 5 seconds this bounces back and forth. I want it to look different than the frog though. I don't want it to be moving in the exact same directions. This is why for me animation ends up taking me so long, is because there's a lot of, it's the same with video editing really. There's a lot of edit it and then rewatch it and make sure it flows right, make sure it looks good together. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and set the wiggle rotation, the bouncing back and forth rotation on everything except this little vine. We're going to play with the puppet pin tool on that one, so I'll see y'all in a second after all of the rotations are added. So I have everything animated except for the vine. What I'm doing right now is I'm just kind of observing it, seeing if anything stands out to me, if my eyes pick up on anything, if my eyes detect any patterns. So if I'm like, oh, the strawberry and the heart are bouncing in the same direction at the same time, I want to make sure that 2 objects that are near each other are not exhibiting the exact same animation behavior, but I like to take a moment to just watch the full loop several times in a row and make sure nothing looks weird or stands out or is behaving strangely or looks exactly like something near it. Now we're going to animate the final part, which is the vine, which we've already done a couple of puppet pin tools, so this one isn't going to be too hard. This one's going to be way less pins than the other ones because we just want 1 base point. So I'm going to select the puppet pin tool in the top. I'm going to pin a little spot at the very bottom of the vine, and I'm going to pin a spot at the top, not quite at the very tippy top, but up here towards the top area of the vine, so that when we swing this back and forth, we can see what it's being anchored to. So we're going to come down into the puppet pin tools. There's only 2. I've got my base spot here at 0, and we're going to come over to 3 seconds, and we're going to set our first animation. So I'm going to have it swing a little bit down, and I'm going to rotate it just slightly so it curls in on itself. And then we'll say by 6, we're going to have it go back to its resting position. Then by 10 seconds, we're going to have it swing to the right and rotate. So I'm going to make it rotate it in such a way that it's cooperating with itself, if that makes sense. And then we're going to get that base position for the very end, and I'm going to move these around a little bit so that they're spaced out a little more evenly. I like to eyeball things a lot of times in After Effects. You could be a lot more technical and mathematical, and this is the perfect halfway point, but eyeballing it works just fine for me, so that's what we're doing. I'm going to easy ease these keyframe points. I just don't want it to come to a resting point here. So I'm going to select these keyframes, right click, and go to keyframe interpolation and change it to the auto Bezier. So it's the circle shape. So it swings right on through here. It doesn't come to a resting point. It just goes right on through. That way it comes back up to its tallest form before it curls back in over here. I might actually go ahead and change both of these to an auto Bezier as well, the 0 frame and the final frame, so it doesn't come to a stopping point there either. So we're going to do auto Bezier. I'm going to watch it from the midpoint. See, it's curling over into the second animation, and then it's going to swing back to its tallest point and just swing on through. To be honest, I think this is pretty cute. So the last thing to do, and this one's pretty easy, I'm going to open up my text one, copy all of the animations in here by, it's only opacity. So I'm going to select opacity so that all keyframes are selected. I'm going to hit Control C to copy. I'm going to drop down our text be right back. I'm going to drop down the transform, click on the opacity, make sure my little toolbar over here is set to the first frame, 0 seconds, hit Control V to paste those keyframes, minimize this, open my third text option, open the transform, click on opacity, double check them on 0 seconds, press Control V to paste those keyframes. Now I'm going to turn off the visibility of starting soon. I'm going to turn on the visibility of be right back. I'm going to fast forward into the middle. So it looks pretty good. And another thing is I kind of want the text to wiggle. I'm really into this wave effect lately. So I'm going to come over into my effects and presets bar, which if you don't see that on your sidebar, drop down your window and click on effects and presets. It's Control 5 if you're a keyboard shortcut person. And I'm going to search for wave. And under distort, there's one called wave warp. So I'm going to click and drag that into my layer that I want to add this onto. That's obviously not what I want it to look like. So I'm going to come up into the wave warp settings in the effect controls, which again, drop down your Windows toolbar and click on effect controls if you're not already seeing it. So I'm going to change my wave height. I'm going to keep it at 10 for now, but what I really want to change is that wave width. I'm going to change this to about 200. And now it's a much gentler wiggle, but it's moving way too fast. So I'm going to slow the wave speed down to like 0.4. That's a much gentler wiggle. It matches the speed of the rest of everything's rotation. 10 might be a little too high for the wave height, so I'm going to drop this down to about 6. I still want there to be a pretty visible effect on the text. Overall, that looks pretty good. So what I want to double check with at the very end, I'm just going to drag this to the last like 5% of the animation and play it from here. Well, since the text is invisible, actually it's perfect. If the text didn't go 0 transparency, what I was looking for there is I wanted to make sure that the wave warp wasn't clipping or showing that it was obviously looping, but it's actually a nice workaround that the text goes transparent. We don't even have to worry about that. So now we've got like a nice little gentle wiggle on the text. There's a little bit more dynamic action happening. It's not just static and stand still. And the last thing I need to do now is just copy that wave warp. So I select it up here in the effect controls, make sure that wave warp is highlighted, press Control C to copy it, turn on the visibility for text be right back, turn off the visibility for end, press Control V while I have text be right back selected, press spacebar to make sure it copied properly, and it did. And I think this is my second time animating this. It looks better today than it did last night though, to be fair. Hi, it's me again. I don't feel like turning my camera back on and all the lights back on, but I noticed when I was exporting and previewing this that the way that I have the wave warp set up, if you look at that G at the bottom right here, because of the dimensions of the original image, it also happens up at the top with the T. If you watch right there, the T gets cut off because it's hitting the top dimension of the actual image. So the way that I'm going to fix that is I'm going to select the layer that's being cut off by that wave warp. I'm going to search in my effects and presets for one called Grow Bounds, and I'm going to drag that onto my layer, and then I'm going to make sure it's positioned above the wave warp. So I'm going to click and drag that up to the top. I'm going to give this a pretty high value. Well, it looks like 10 pixels actually covers it. Let me go ahead and set it down to 0 just to show you. So click and drag to a part where you see where it's being cut off, and then start to adjust the pixel value. Look, literally like 9 takes care of it. Yeah, it looks like it literally just needed 5 pixels. And then I will copy this Grow Bounds and I will paste it onto the rest of the layers that are being affected by the wave warp, and just make sure that's positioned above the wave warp. So this is showing up first. Then I'll toggle on the visibility and just double check that everything is looking good. And there we go. Fixed. Okay, I just turned off all my lights and closed OBS down, and I realized I forgot to show one of the most important parts, which is the exporting of the file. So So let's jump back into this. So when I'm done with an animation, if it has a transparency, it's a different story. That's when I usually export as a WebM and make sure that the alpha is turned on. I can do a video on exporting with transparency if you're curious. This one does not have a transparency, so we just need to export it as a MP4 format. I'm going to click on File and I'm going to come down to Export. I'm going to add to Adobe Media Encoder queue. I alternate between using the Adobe Media Encoder and the render queue, but this one is my preferred method. I just like the format a lot better. And once that opens, we aren't going to be exporting this as an animated GIF, so I'm going to drop this bar down and I'm going to look for H.264 in the list, which is how I export MP4 format, H.264. Preset, I'm just going to keep it on match source high bitrate. That's fine with me. And then I'm going to come down into output file and I'm going to click this, and this is where I change where it's saving to. I could go ahead and press play, but the cool thing is you can create a whole queue. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to turn off start, turn on be right back, file, export, add to media encoder queue, and then I'll do the same thing for the ending scene. Okay, and then once I have all of these set up, I'm gonna just press the play button up here in the top corner, and I'm gonna wait on these to export. So that's the export process. Okay. But that is my process with simple animations in After Effects, specifically easing wiggles and rotations and scales. I think this turned out pretty cute. I'm pretty proud of it. So I'm going to export two versions of this, one that looks just like this, and the second one that's going to have everything turned off except the frog and obviously the text. And this will be a super minimal version, and then there's going to be the cluttercore cottagecore version. It took me an hour and 5 minutes to do that. It probably would have taken me less time if I wasn't talking through the process, but I do think I've gotten a little bit faster at animating, so I'm probably going to be posting a lot more of these onto my blog and probably my coffee. I might do an Etsy situation, I'm not really sure, but so I think I'm about to enter my animation era. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed part 1 and part 2 of this make and overlay with me. I've got a couple of other videos planned. Next week I'm hoping to put out a video on my tarot deck collection, so I'll be going over all of my tarot decks and oracle decks that I have. If y'all have any suggestions or things you'd like to see from me, something else I think I want to do is like going over my favorite Stardew mods, especially because I'm remodding my save file right now. And if there's anything in particular y'all might like to see from me, let me know in a comment below. Thank you all so much for supporting my channel, for coming to hang out in my streams, sticking with me through thick and thin, all of the craziness of 2022. And yeah, I got a Twitter, I got an Instagram, and I got a Twitch over at Hey Shady Lady. My website, heyshadyLady.com, is where my blog is, and you can get the download to this overlay pack. And I think that's all. So thanks again so much, and I hope you all have a beautiful weekend, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye everybody!